Hi, I'm Malika Bilal in for Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, Ethiopia's media war. Anti-terrorism laws are landing writers and reporters in prison or exile. We ask why. Our digital producer, Omar Badar, is tapping into the online conversations that you're having. And speaking of tapping into those conversations, the stream has been covering and following the Zone 9 bloggers for a while with that hashtag.
Right. Yep, the hashtag, emerged a while back. You can take a look at my screen here. This is a web piece that we did from back in July. The hashtag is in solidarity with the bloggers who were imprisoned in Ethiopia. But for the purposes of this conversation today, folks at home can tweet us using the hashtag AJStream. That'll be the hashtag, and when you tweet in on that, we'll make sure to get to those tweets later on during the show. Looking forward to those tweets. Now, with us in the studio is Soliana Shimeles, a co-founder of the blog Zone 9. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Now, like Omar said, our show topics often start as hashtags. They tip us off to what's important to you. So here's a few others we're following today. Terrorism and treason. That's what Ethiopia's Zone 9 bloggers are accused of. And they're not alone. The band of writers jailed since April are the face of a widespread crackdown on the media. Officials charged at least 22 journalists, bloggers, and publishers with criminal activities in the past year. More than 30 fled Ethiopia to avoid the same fate. The government warns they're conspiring with banned opposition groups using press freedom to cover up plots against Ethiopia's democratic state. Well, calls for both national security and free expression are mounting ahead of May elections. So can a balance be struck? Well, with us to discuss in London, Abiy Berhane is the Ethiopian Embassy's Minister Counselor for Public Diplomacy and Communication. In Washington, Tamrat Negera is Exile journalist and co-founder of the Addis Neger newspaper. And in Texas, visiting from Ethiopia, Tamrat Gibre-Georgis is managing editor of Addis Fortune, an English business weekly. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Now, Soliana, I want to start with you. Explain to us how it is that you came to be here in Washington, D.C. when the other Zone 9 bloggers are in prison.
That was only fortunate. So the arrest happened on April 25th. 6 Zone 9 bloggers who are my friends, and the other 3 journalists who are close friends to the bloggers had been arrested on April 25th. I was traveling. I was not home. So I decided to stay for a while and see if things are going to be changed at home. So I waited for a while, for 3 months, and nothing was changed. And on July, I found out that I'm also charged as a seventh blogger in absentia. So then I decided to come to the US, and I traveled back to US.
And what are you being charged with?
So the charge, it's a bit confusing. The charges came when the arrest happened. They said it was basically trying to destabilize the state by working with the so-called human rights organizations. That was the charge given on the arrest. And then after 23 days, the government said they find out that these bloggers had been active in some kind of terrorism act. Therefore, they changed the charge to terrorism. So then we waited for 86 days, and after that, the charges came. The first one was terrorism, and the other one was outrage against the constitution, trying to change the government unconstitutionally. Those were the charges. And for the last 6 months, we're still talking about the clear charges, but basically it is terrorism and treason.
So you're charged with terrorism. How does that make you feel? How do you sleep at night? What's going through your head, and what happened when you heard those charges against you?
It's not unexpected, honestly speaking. I mean, once you are in such kind of activities, once you are talking about things that the government wouldn't like, you would expect that something would happen to you in one of the coming days, because we saw that in previous people, we saw in other journalists. We used to visit journalists at prison, and we already know that this kind of activities are really dangerous, so it's not a new thing. But when it happens, it makes you feel different again. You know, you feel like this is going to happen to me, but you're not sure that when it's going to happen to you, and you don't really know how it feels because it just didn't happen to you. When it happens, it's completely different. first it makes you feel like, oh my God, am I going to be a part of this terrorism charges? And terrorism is big, it's serious, and we know the anti-terrorism proclamation is very serious.
Of course.
And previously you got some hopes that no, they're not going to charge us on anti-terrorism law. They're just going to take this not to that level, to the terrorism level. So you are hoping, and when it happens, it's like you are as one of them, one of your colleagues or one of your close friends who had been in jail for writing and for expressing their opinions. So yeah, you will get used to it anyway. And you will understand, you will really understand what it means to be charged in terrorism and what it means to be charged because you said something that the government wouldn't like.
You get used to it. So Abi, I want to direct that to you because you heard Soliana say this wasn't a surprise. People that criticize the government, this is what happens.
Well, we have heard these criticisms every now and then, but I would disagree with Soliana. First of all, the freedom of press is a constitutional right. It is guaranteed under Ethiopia's constitution, and the government tries to do everything in its power to try and strengthen that democratic right. But unfortunately, some people are not using this right constructively and positively, and they are trying to use it for negative and destructive purposes. And the government, because it's a government and has the primary duty and responsibility of maintaining law and order. Excuse me, I haven't finished. I haven't interrupted anybody. I'm listening patiently.
You have a structure.
Let me finish what I have started to say. Why do you want to interrupt me?
Tamraji, I hear your point.
Why do you want to interrupt me?
Tamraji, I hear your point.
Abi, I hear your point.
Abi, why don't we let you finish your sentence and then we'll go to Tamraji.
Yeah, let me finish what I've started to say and then we can come in. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that the government has the primary duty and responsibility of maintaining law and order and ensuring peace and stability. And we live in a country where there are 80 plus ethnic groups, and each one of them have rights to be respected. And the government has a duty to ensure that no one uses the free press to try and incite violence, ethnic-based violence in the country, and religion-based violence within the country. Apart from that, we live in a region where, even though Ethiopia itself is peaceful and stable, there are other hotspots in our region that call for caution. And therefore, the government, by virtue of the fact that it has the duty and the responsibility to maintain law and order and peace and stability, tries to make sure that the media is used positively and constructively. And no one should try to use the media for negative and destructive purposes. That's why we have now a section of the media which respects the law and the constitution, working well and thriving, and another section of the media that has decided to flout the rules and the regulations, to break the law, and have been, that section of the media has been accountable to answer the charges that has been leveled against it. You see, what we are trying to say here is the press freedom is a very good freedom. Everyone has the right to enjoy that freedom. It has to be strengthened. Yep. In order for that to happen, all of us have to work together to strengthen it.
We hear you out,
when
Abi.
One builds and the other one destroys, there's nothing we can do about that.
We actually have a video comment here from our community. Take a listen to this.
Some in the media blur the distinction between free speech and hate speech. Not to speak of subversion. Zone 9ers are not one, but there are many others. So much hate journalism is out there, as there is so much of opposition politics driven mainly by hatred. The jurisprudence is unambiguous. What complicates this, however, is lack of an independent and competent judiciary.
So, Tamrat, and what do you make of this claim that there's a lot of what people claim to be journalism is actually in fact hate speech? Is there any basis for this in your view?
Imagine a Washington, D.C. or the United States without any English newspaper, any English website, but 2 or 3 Portuguese newspapers. The kind of reality we have in Ethiopia is that Ethiopia has its own languages, and all the newspapers that are being eradicated, all the websites that are being blocked are the ones that are operating in Amharic and with the right language, because journalism or writing essentially is giving a picture of reality. And who do you give it a picture of reality for? For ourselves, for our people, for our community. So the government is intrinsically controlling the newspapers, controlling the media, controlling the TV stations and the radio so that it can have a particular kind of reality. And my colleague, as a journalist, Hamrat G, what they is doing is writing for like the expats in English in a country with 80 million people who couldn't even read mostly their own languages. So the government is
so Tamrat, and you brought up Tamrat G, and so I want him to respond to that, because what you're saying is the reason he gets away, in your view, with what he publishes is because it's in English. So I pulled up here on my screen. This is one of the editorials from Addis Fortune. Learning from history is one thing that the ruling party fails to get right in over 20 years of governing, and that's the first paragraph from a recent editorial. It is critical of the ruling party.
Then nobody cares about it, because only diplomats and some businessmen read that newspaper. But newspapers,
so let's
like
give Tamrat G a chance to respond to that.
The broader freedom of expression and the right to express itself, in which Soliana and her friends have been have conducted their activities, as one aspect. And where I fall in is the freedom of the press, where in both cases constitutional guarantees have been granted. I see the perspective from Abe, and yes, the Constitution provides that sort of guarantee and everything. But nevertheless, what I see is that in both cases, whether it is the right to express oneself or the media's right to practice its professionalism, in both ways, I see that there is a series of regression and erosion of those rights over the last 10, 15 years, both ideologically, politically, legally. And the space the media has and people have to express themselves is not something that I can confidently talk about, because the challenge is enormous, particularly after the introduction of the anti-terrorism law, in particular Provision 6.
And that's, of course, a law that was introduced in 2009.
Yes, in 2009. So in both cases of freedom of expression and that of the press, the challenge remains to be enormous. Our experiences on the ground is not something that we feel comfortable about, that with seeing every day and every time that our colleagues are going to jail right and left. I'm not in a position to tell you that the picture out there is quite rosy. It's extremely difficult.
And interestingly enough, that lack of confidence is also reflected in our community to some extent. We put out a question for people to basically rate the state of free press in Ethiopia. We have Dawit here who tweeted in saying, if I honestly answer that question, I might go to jail. So that tells you how I rate it. And then we have Abati here who says, I would actually give it 3 out of 5 for press freedom, but at the same time, he also gives the rating the same rating for the ethics of journalism in the country. So, Yana, if you had to give it a rating, what rating would you give free press in the country?
1 out of 5.
1 out of 5?
Yeah, I mean, there are some press organizations and press institutes who are really operating, and I understand and recognize that they're operating in a very difficult situation, of course, but things are getting very worse from time to time, and we know that when election is approaching, things really get tight and the crackdown increases. For example, you can see the crackdown started with us on April, and then it was followed by the charge of five media houses by the government, and particularly then after the exile of 30 journalists came. So it seems like the situation in grassroots level is very hostile, very difficult. Some organizations are trying to strive on that, and some others failed. So by average, the age of a media house in Ethiopia is 2.5 years or something like that, except those 3 who are operating for the last long years. And I would say they were playing it very safe, trying to comment on the government like any soft way, and most of the time they say what the government wouldn't disagree, at least, and some of them will say definitely what the government would agree. Therefore, for example, like to add on what Abi said, yeah, but who is the one who's going to decide whether the comment given by the media is constructive or destructive? If you give that right for the government, you're just taking the rights given under the Constitution away. So the government's expected to give the rights under the Constitution and at the same time to grant them for everybody to exercise
and
them.
you find that problematic.
Yeah.
So let's let Abi respond to that. Whose right is it?
Yes. Thank you very much. I don't think Soliana understood correctly what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say was that if you use the media positively and constructively, meaning to strengthen democracy and good governance and to allow for the further nourishment of democracy in the country, then you have done a good job. And however, you know, there is a section of the media that uses press freedom for different purposes, for advancing subversive political agendas. And who decides that? Well, the act itself decides what we are talking about here. For example, if the government has enacted a law which says that, for example, there are some political organizations that have been proscribed as terrorist organizations. Now, this proscription was done by the House of People's Representatives of the country, that is the Ethiopian Parliament, which means that it's a law everybody must abide by.
This is the bogus thing that is going on in
Ethiopia.
Excuse me,
let me finish.
No,
I haven't interrupted you.
Because
I haven't interrupted anybody. Now, if
this
is the law of the land, then the law of the land has to be respected.
Is designed to perpetuate an oppressive structure and an elite that has been benefiting
if
from
you
the
want to
political
change the law of the land,
no,
if you want to change the law of the land, what you need to do
24 plus
is organize yourself into a political party, get yourself elected into parliament and change the law.
We've heard you say that this is the law of the land. I want to get an example of what that law has looked like in personal reactions. I mean, just have a look at this. Have a look at this. This is something I'm going to show on my computer. Now, this is a leak from WikiLeaks. This was a U.S. embassy cable that was leaked. And this mentions the publication of one of our guests here today, Tamrat Negara. This says the state-owned Addis Zemen Amharic language newspaper has targeted the opposition-leaning Amharic weekly Addis Negar, the publication of our guests, labeling it anti-democracy, anti-establishment, and specifically naming editor-in-chief Tamrat Negara as a chief driver of this slant. So, Tamrat, is this what led you to leave the country?
Absolutely. First of all, for what he calls the political participation, in 2005, I ran as a non-violent city council member for the opposition. I won my seat. That election was rigged. Okay, I was dissatisfied with the political process both by the opposition and the government, so I chose journalism to emphasize, and I went to writing, believing that I would be still contributing to my country, to my people, by giving a picture of reality, by analyzing, by criticizing both the ruling party and the opposition. Then what happens? We became much more stronger because we became much more influential in the elite, in the common man, and our newspaper became a phenomenon that the nation has never seen. And what happens? We are threatened, and two of my editors, the editor, the executive editor and the managing editor, who are exiled like me, are charged with and convicted on terrorism. Why? The country does not belong only to people like Abi. This is our country as well. If it is our country, we ought to speak, we ought to write. We did not incite violence. I know violence if I want to. I am young, I can afford to. There are already organizations, both from my ethnic group or my ideological Ethiopian nationalism, that espouse violence. I explicitly have been against violence for its ideological purposes or for its moral purposes.
Just to add on that, to add on Tamrat, I mean, one of the things that makes everybody surprised is that, like, who are targeted are specifically non-violent, talking about the respecting of the constitution and the law. For example, you can see as Zone 9 we did 4 campaigns. The first one was Respect the Constitution campaign, talking about the rights given under the constitution and asking the government and other parties to respect it. And the second campaign we did Freedom of Expression campaign. It was specifically talking about censorship and the situation of freedom of expression. And it's even online. Imagine it's only 1 million people who are accessing this, and we were doing that campaign. And you can see all different campaigns. All these campaigns and the statements put out there are now evidences against the charge of terrorism on us. It is the same with other journalists too. It is the same with Tamrat's colleagues who are charged in terrorism, and the evidence that was given for the court was the article. It was published on their website. It is the same with Iskandar Nagga. It is the same with Riot Alamu. So it just makes you feel like the government is saying these people are inciting violence, they were involved in violence, but in the other way, all the evidences given for the court are the one that they wrote on the newspaper, on the website.
There are people online who are also dismissive of that security concern. You have Jonas who tweeted in saying, I don't think security is the reason for curtailing free speech. The government is using anti-terrorism law to silence independent media. And then we have here on Facebook, Bilal says, the few privately owned newspapers and magazines have either the option of aligning themselves with the government propaganda machine or being labeled as sponsors of terrorism. Abi, I want to throw this to you. Are there any concrete examples for any of the people who have been imprisoned to show that they actually have presented a serious threat to national security in any way?
No, quite frankly, I wouldn't like to comment on specific cases. First of all, some of the cases are still ongoing, and it wouldn't be right for me to comment on those cases. But even in cases where a decision has already been taken, I don't think it is the right thing to do. So I'll only speak in general terms.
Because you don't have any specific cases. Let me give you a specific case from my newspaper.
Tamrat, please don't speak for me. Don't tell me what I have and what I have not. No. Please.
Currently,
please don't do that. No, you said something right earlier. Tamrat, please listen to me.
You
said something right.
A specific example.
You said that the country belongs.
Specific example. Abi, finish your point, and we'll get to.
You said that the country belongs to all of us, and that is correct. Nobody is saying that the country belongs to me and it doesn't belong to you. If the country belongs to us, then it is for us to try and create a conducive environment for us to talk to each other properly so that we can understand each other and move forward together. Even though we disagree on political positions, that doesn't make any difference. No, you can support another political party, I can support another political party. There's no problem there. The problem comes when we don't realize the fact that politics is not about spreading hatred. It's not about spreading rumors. It's not about inciting the public to violence. It's not anything like that. It's just a matter of having different views in the same society. This is the only way we can encourage
speaking of different views, we want that example that Tamrat had for us. Tamrat, go ahead.
There is currently a political party that is operating from outside called Gumbot 7, Gumbot Sabat, which started when we were in the country. And while we were in the country, one, they reverted to violence from non-violence. Two, they started cooperating with Eritrea, which is a historic enemy and at the same time a terrorist sponsoring state in the Horn. We specifically wrote editorial, feature writing, saying this party is following a wrong track and regressing the politics. But specifically that article, specifically that editorial became a term, like was interpreted as if we were supporting Gumbot Sabat, which we do not, which we explicitly stated. And this is a very organization, even the British government is kind of putting them in a terrorist list. And what happens?
And Tamrat, I'm going to pause you there with the what happened. We'll find out what happened in the post show, but we have heard you explicitly say that you are against terrorism and are not in that group. The same thing from Soliana. So Soliana, I want to ask you, do you dare go home, or is that in the works?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm the first defendant of the case, so there's no way that these charges are going to be dropped. I mean, given from the previous experiences that charges of terrorism, once you are charged, it's automatically you're convicted. We all know that. No one from
we'll hear from Ebi in our post show on whether or not that will ever be allowed for you. Looking forward to hearing that. That's all the time we have for now. I want to thank our guests, Soliana Shemelis, Ebi Berhani, Tamrat Nagera, and Tamrat Gebregiors. Stay with us, though. The post-show is next at streams@aljazeera.com. Now, on the next show, thousands of Spaniards have been evicted from their homes by their Wall Street landlords. We'll talk to some of them who are fighting back. But until then, we'll see you online. We're back with the Post Show talking about Ethiopia's press freedom. So let's get right back to that conversation. Before we entered into the Post Show, Soliana was saying you don't dare go back home. So Abi, I'd like an answer from you on what would happen if Soliana tried.
I think Soliana is charged with a certain violation, and if she goes back, I think the law will take its course and she'll be asked to answer those charges.
In short, she will be in jail. That's what he's trying to say. Yeah.
May I comment here?
No. I'm not threatening you. I'm just saying that there are certain charges that that are leveled against you, right, Soliana?
No worries, Abi. I'm already threatened.
I haven't heard that those charges are now lifted. So as far as I know, those charges are still standing. So if you go back home, I think you'll be asked to answer those charges.
Mr. Arabi?
Tamrat?
Yes.
If you truly agree that this is our country, if you truly agree that with my statement that we also care for this country, the first thing you should do is drop all the charges. Second thing you should do is get rid of this anti-terrorism law that you artificially created. Third, stop threatening us, stop threatening writers, stop threatening journalists, and let every journalist in prison, every blogger in prison, every pacifist activist in prison. Let my people go. Let our people go. Let our journalists, our colleagues go. I have no interest of being exiled, living in a foreign land, learning a new language, learning a new trade, and suffering exile. I'd rather be poor person in my own country than a millionaire or richest here. A few weeks, on Saturday Night Live, when they celebrated their 40th year, I was crying. The reason I was crying is someone who has a country is celebrating their 40th year, and I had to shut down a newspaper while loving it without even seeing it a third year. I have no interest of being an exile. No. If I plead you people struggled once upon a time. You people were in the trenches once upon a time.
Nobody wants you to live in exile.
No, you do.
Nobody wants you to live in exile. No, you
if you want to break this cycle, if you really want
the government doesn't take pleasure in putting people behind bars.
No,
it's only a matter of respecting the law. Or
no, the law is there. The law is there to protect the economics and the political interests of yours.
Outside jail.
No.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, when you're talking over each other, we can't hear you, so I'm going to cut that and go to our community because they want to get in on this conversation as well.
We got a tweet from somebody who's actually not a supporter of the Zone 9 bloggers. We have Dagmawi here who tweeted in saying the Zone 9 bloggers are just tools with a political agenda. Everybody knows what Soliana was going to have to say before she actually says it. Before I give you a chance to respond to that if you wanted to, Tamarat G, actually, I'm curious whether you think that there is anything wrong in having a political agenda. Is that something that would be inappropriate from your point of view?
Not at all. People are free to subscribe to whatever view they have, and they are free to express it in a manner they deem is fit. What I see is that, yes, indeed, the state may have concern about security issues because, as Mr. Abiy said, Ethiopia is in a region, in a very volatile region, and the balance between societies need to have an orderly life and the right of individuals to express their views is most critical. Nevertheless, there are laws in Ethiopia that protect the right of people to express their views. You can call the penal code and the media law, which puts the bar so high that the state's ability to prosecute these individuals should pass the test of present and clear and present danger, imminent danger. Where I see the problem is that the state seems to get overboard in exercising that need of society to have an orderly life. I don't see that those who are victims of the exercise of the anti-terrorism laws in Ethiopia are anywhere near to practicing violence. I know most of them. Some of them are my closest friends. And I don't believe that they have done anything wrong that should keep them in jail for one night, let alone going through all the sufferings. It's a tragic mistake that I regret to this day.
And Soliana, I see you nodding your head there. I see Soliana nodding her head. So I pulled up here on my screen. This is one of the posts from the Zone 9 bloggers. This was on Facebook. This was the start of a hashtag that you all started, Ethiopian Dream. And so I'll read this. My Ethiopian dream is to see rule of law become the only rule of the land and the most sacred value. I aspire to see Ethiopia where no one is more equal than others before the law of this one. This is one of the things that your blogging collective put out.
Yeah.
But then you heard criticism like the one that Omar read out to you from Twitter. What do you make of that criticism?
It's obvious that people would know what I'm going to say here, because I was saying this on my blogs, I was saying it on my personal reflections, and my colleagues had been saying this thing before the arrest and even after the arrest. Therefore, there is no wonder that I'm going to say this again here. The anti-terrorism proclamation is really stifling dissent, and we are facing so many challenges because of the anti-terrorism proclamation, and my colleagues are facing that charges because of this statement that you have read. This is also one of the evidences given for the court saying that we are inciting violence. Ethiopian Dream was a campaign conducted on September 2013, and it was specifically talking about tolerance between different political opposition opinions and dreaming for a better Ethiopia within our differences. That was the objective, and we did that campaign, and one of the things that we were talking on the campaign was the one that you have read. And I know everybody would say like this is not going to be a violence activity in any way, and so I wonder how people would say like do Niners have a political agenda. 9 people who have met in online, who never met in person previously, who started talking online and then coming up with a blog called Zone 9 couldn't be any political agenda.
So we have somebody who's actually bringing up a pretty interesting point online about sort of the ethnic makeup in the country. It's a comment that has come up from multiple people. We have Zelalem here who tweeted in saying, we can't say that there is democracy in Ethiopia because the minority-led government is surviving with the help of the gun. And then we have Saleh here who says, an ethnic-based single-party apartheid ruling system that must be removed in order to allow journalism to actually function. Tamarat, and in your view, is having that discussion legitimate criticism, or is raising the ethnic aspect of things just a divisive form of rhetoric that is not really helpful to the situation?
Ethnic reality in Ethiopia did not start with this government, but the solution is not suppression. The solution is much more freedom so that we can express ourselves, we can learn from each other, we can know each other. Earlier there was a framing of the situation like there is a society's need for security which should be balanced with free expression. This is a bogus structure. The reality is that we have, as people are saying, an elite, a small fraction of elite that is interested with perpetuating the current political economic structure, and those are the people that are like Mr. Abiy, who are benefiting for their own economic interests and continuing the suppression. And that is the story they don't want to go out. Currently, the government is the largest investor in infrastructure and everything, and who benefits from that? What kind of corporations do get it? Who is the general?
I didn't call you names. I didn't call you names. You shouldn't, say that I'm doing this for money or anything.
No.
You are actually insulting me.
I'm not insulting you. I'm expressing the kind of thing we are living.
Because I'm benefiting from it. I have a conscience just like everybody else. If I didn't believe in what I'm doing, I wouldn't do it.
No, live up to it.
I don't have to subscribe to your logic, Tamrat. I don't have to subscribe to your logic.
I'm not asking you
I
to
have
subscribe to
my own way of thinking. And I don't have to
Tamrat, you raise concerns, and I hear you, Abi, resisting those concerns. I want to end with this. This is from the government's viewpoint. This is a letter to the Washington Post from the Ethiopian embassy here in Washington, D.C. And this was responding to an editorial that the Post wrote not too long ago, to suggest that journalists have been targeted under the guise of terrorism, he writes, ignores the fact that Ethiopia is faced with significant and dangerous terrorist threats, including the activities of organizations linked to Al-Qaeda in Somalia and Yemen and terrorist operations in Eritrea, end quote. Abi, do you think that more needs to be done to differentiate between real threats, as the Ethiopian embassy spokesperson wrote here, and journalists and bloggers who are representing dissent?
No, my view is that journalists and bloggers are free to exercise their right as journalists. The problem is there are laws that are in place in the country which they must respect, because in every other country there is a principle called the supremacy of the law. Why do people think that Ethiopian laws are there to kick around and flout all the time?
Well, the Jim
Ethiopian
Crow
laws
was also
must
a law.
also be respected
segregation
by
was
people.
also a law. The fact that there is a law and everybody should respect it doesn't simply go on.
Yeah.
The law has
No.
to stand and be subjected to
If
the
there
needs
is
of
a
the
law,
human being.
it has
The
to be
law-
respected.
The law.
If you
and
don't like the law, then change it
anti-terrorism
in
law-
Parliament. That's
the
what you need to
anti-terrorism
do.
law is
Yes.
such kind of laws like the anti-terrorism law are there to protect your need. You are the one in charge.
No, no,
you
no.
are the one in the system. If
No,
you
no,
really want
no,
a democracy,
no.
you can do
the
your part.
anti-terrorism law,
sir,
the
you can do your part.
anti-terrorism law has actually served Ethiopia
I am a
very
Protestant.
well.
I am
One
a
of-
Protestant
one of the
minister.
reasons-
How can I be
One-
correlated with
One of the
Al-Qaeda?
reasons
I
why
am a
Ethiopia
Protestant. There are
is
Christians,
peaceful and
but
stable.
9 of the
in a
bloggers-
Gentlemen,
turbulent
I'm
area.
going to pause you there because no one can hear your points. So I think that you made them very clearly throughout the show. I'm going to end our conversation here, but before we do that, we'll get the last words from our community. Omar.
Yeah, we can get a couple comments from people who disagree with each other. We have Kotetam here, who commented on Facebook saying, letting the media be without checks and balances will only lead to its abuse and resulting in the eroding of democracy. So the government should be watchful when it comes to the media and keep it on a short leash. On the other hand, we have Hallelujah here, who tweeted in saying, the Zone 9 bloggers were voices of rational dissent. Their arrest has crushed the spirit of a generation.
We're out of time. I want to thank all of our guests. On the next show, thousands of Spaniards have been evicted from their homes by their Wall Street landlords. We'll talk to some of them who are fighting back. And until then, our discussion on Ethiopia and the media landscape will continue online, so head there with hashtag AJStream.